use this mic, so I think it's necessary. Not too many people.
Because we're live streaming
Ah.
and recording.
So to sit close, yeah.
You need to hold it.
Hold.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just
Okay. When speaking, of course. Yeah. Good. I will try to behave.
and really close.
Close. Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Linus.
Don't try to behave.
Yeah, but always just at least to say, if not to do, not to do.
Ska det bli kurs att Karin, jag tror. Du är det inte.
Oh, good morning. Linus.
Karin.
Oh, Lithuania.
Johannes penna med henne. I min ryggsäck så har jag en mörkblå anteckningsbok. Hon kan ge mig den. Ja.
Not yet. Don't worry, it's coming. No, it's still manageable.
It's difficult for henne.
I hate this too many people, but on the other hand, if you find some nice place,
Yeah, it's
select. Yeah.
you meet with. I think it's possible to meet great people, but it's as you say, it's very crowded as well.
Yeah. And better to stay outside,
Yes, when you're
not here.
Bum, bum, bum.
on the beach, it's like.
Yeah, most islands
That's on.
at least at night. Yeah.
All right. Hello and welcome everyone to this wonderful panel that we have today. My name is Carl. I'm with Ukrainska Hubben. I'll be moderating this conversation. And with me, I have a panel of eminent guests, and I'll just let them quickly introduce themselves. So, Judith, do you want to start? Yeah.
My karaoke days are over. Judith Goff, partner in Defence and Security with PA Consulting, but also previously the British ambassador to Sweden and also, more importantly, to Ukraine.
Good morning. I'm Karin Karlsbro, member of the European Parliament and the Standing Rapporteur for Economic Support and Trade with Ukraine.
Good morning, I'm Linus Linkevičius, currently an ambassador of Lithuania to Sweden, former minister.
Good morning, everyone, and congratulations to making it. My name is Oscar Johnson. I am a researcher at the Swedish Defence University and at the NATO Defence College as well.
Marvelous. So yeah, the panel is Europe after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a new security reality. And I think we'll actually start with you, Oscar, on because since the invasion, European defence budgets have increased quite drastically, but our actual defence capability is severely lacking in several parts. So besides, budget and time, what would you say are the major issues that are facing European rearmament, as we speak?
Yes, well, except time and budget, there's a whole range of issues facing European defence. I think the gravest one is actually if you saw Novus poll this 2 weeks ago, the top 10 questions in Sweden, and defence has fallen off. It's been on the top for a long time. And many people feel that defence is settled because now we're committed to 3.5% of GDP, we joined NATO. What on earth possibly more could need to be done? And the problem is that there's so much stuff that still needs to be done. I think just 3 quick examples. If you look at the commitment, is just the start of a journey. I mean, it's very far from achieving capability. I'll take just one example. Sweden bought Taurus cruise missiles, an existing missile to integrate on our existing fighter jets. And the lead time is somewhere around 2.5 years. That's just for something that is there. That doesn't even require any new personnel or shift in organization, etc. So the rule of thumb is, you need a decade for everything after you actually start buying it. But the scale, I think, is the most important thing. So, Russian deep-range strike drones, Girans, are not necessarily interesting because they're so advanced from an engineering perspective, but because of the mass. They're building 10,000 of them, which need you would need probably 1,000 launchers of interception missiles to protect all of Sweden. So it's not enough that you just have one system that looks good, but you need the scale to match the Russian challenge or technology that nullifies scale. Also, I think we're stuck in old paradigms. I think a lot of what we're trying to do is catch up to yesterday's deficits. The holes we have in our armed forces across Europe is still what we've been, combating for 15, 20 years. And plugging them, makes sense from an immediate military perspective. But it's not very novel, and it's not bringing you necessarily where you want to be tomorrow. And then, of course, I think solitary and lack of unity, which is all the more important given the U.S. questionable role. U.S. has always been the integrator that makes everything come together. What if they pull out? Then it becomes even much worse with a lot of European NATO member states doing very, very different things that doesn't even integrate each other. So I'll stop there, but that's just a little taste of all the challenges, except time and budgets.
Yeah, no, time and budget is always the biggest one, so I decided not to give you an easy answer there. But Mr. Ambassador, the Baltics have been prime targets for Russian hybrid warfare for a very long time now. And how would you say that their tactics and strategy when it comes to hybrid warfare changed since 2022? Have you been able to feel the less resources they're able to spend on that? And what would you also say has proven the most effective in countering these measures?
Good morning, everyone. Indeed, right, hybrid threats, or asymmetric, we can say, now becoming even more important. Because conventional attack may be less probable, let's be frank, but hybrid happening as we speak. And you are quite right, not just Lithuania, but all Baltics were exposed to the front line all the time. So we're experiencing this in the course of many, many years. And not by accident, it happened that in all three Baltic states we have NATO centers of excellence dealing with strategic communications in Riga, cyber security in Estonia, and energy security in Lithuania. Why I'm mentioning this, that I also spent some time not just in government but also in NATO, and I remember when we tried to convince NATO military authorities that NATO has something to do with energy security. It was not successful, I can tell. Before Riga summit in 2006, it was not existing as a taskings for military authority, because it was thinking that energy security is something for economy, for European Union probably, but not military, which was wrong, of course, because we were exposed, as I said, to that, and we were blackmailed all the time, had pressure, and because of decommissioning of nuclear power plant in 2009, we were forced to import more than 70% of electricity, for instance, 100% dependence on oil and gas. And after some efforts by all governments from the left to the right, a few years ago we managed to reach the point when we have zero dependence on electricity, oil and gas from Russia, which was a big deal. So why I'm saying this is not just by science fiction, this is our reality. And now we have Center of Excellence of Energy Security in Lithuania. So I believe it's something to be shared with the partners. With the Ukraine itself, it's not compatible because they are making reforms in this situation of war. But in our case, as I said, this pressure was also immense. And we were forced to be flexible and adjustable. That was important to note. So in short, these hybrid threats are known not by books in my country. On the other hand, probability, it's not just high, but I believe it's increasing in the future. And we have to be prepared. And private sector and government has to be prepared to these things to happen. And that's exactly why we are here to discuss these issues.
Thank you very much. And then I'll turn to Karin and the more political side of security, because Europe, whilst we no longer have Hungary basically vetoing all attempts by Europe to aid Ukraine, there are still major fault lines within the Union how we together work with Ukraine and for Ukraine. What would you say the biggest issues are within the EU politically when it comes to security in the war, and what would be the best way of addressing them?
Thank you, and thank you once again for the possibility to be here with you today. Well, I think the answer to your question, it's about mindset. I will share with you something which happened to me last week. I met with a colleague in Brussels, a person who is very much aware what's going on in all parts of Europe, so very much up to date with everything. But he asked me, do you really think, Karin, that Russia will attack Sweden? And I was reflecting a little bit because, well, I don't see soldiers in the street tomorrow. I don't. But as you very well described, this hybrid war against Europe has been ongoing for years. This is not news. And we must understand what is happening around us. And after 4 years of Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine, it's crystal clear what kinds of challenges we face together. And thanks to bravery, determination, and also technical innovation, Ukraine can win this war if we give the right support. And if we understand that Russia is a threat to all of us and do what we can to press down the Russian economy, and that's something I maybe can come back to later. But when we don't share the right mindset, it means that we don't do enough to press the Russian war economy, where we could, I think, do a lot to stop Putin.
Great, thanks. And also the economic and industrial track then, Judith, Europe is of course trying to stand on its own, especially now with the current US administrations. Ukraine has had to stand on its own for a lot of its needs. What do you see as good lessons or lessons for Europe to learn from Ukraine when it comes to building domestic capability?
Thank you. I have a slight feeling Karin has the same starting point as I do, because the first word I've written down is mindset as well. But I think it's absolutely crucial. If you go back to 2014, and let's be really clear, Ukraine has been fighting for its survival and existence now for 12 years. It's a mindset thing. Mindset that understands that Russia is a threat, and mindset that the response has to be the whole of society. And during my time in Ukraine, what really struck me was how much everybody felt a responsibility collectively and individually for the defense of their country and the survival of their people. And I can remember, we talk a lot about drones now. Ukraine has been running drones programs for a very long time, but their initial drones programs were driven by volunteers who were not paid, who came from all walks of life, who were converting commercially available drones into something that was a little bit punchier. So mindset is critical. I would say build, don't buy, that's linked into that point, where Ukraine has been really successful in innovating on the battlefield and ensuring that they have what they need, is because they've been building. And they've also been doing it in a very decentralized way. Individual battle groups and battalions doing their own thing, innovating as they go, responding to the enemy, and creating ecosystems. Volunteers, universities, businesses, government working together. I think the key thing I would take, however, is when you're talking about capability, and this links into Oscar's point about how long it takes to buy things, speed is now a capability. If you can't do things quickly, if you can't procure, if you can't get what you need, you're going to be left behind. Again, to talk about drones, the United Kingdom, which I used to represent, I'm a little bit freer now, I don't have to say, take the government line, prides itself on having 8,000 drones. Now that would probably last a matter of hours on the front line in Ukraine. We need to be quicker.
Thank you very much. And then I'll go back to Mr. Ambassador for a bit more long-term question looking forwards. Lithuania has famously not had the same optimistic view on Russia as, say, Germany when it comes to being able to, peace-free trade and, friendly relations, which of course has come to haunt us quite a bit these days. Is there a risk that Europe once again will lower its guard against Russia once the war is over? And what would you say our position towards Moscow should be in the long term?
Quite logical question. Well, but to say we are not optimistic, I would say we were always realistic, and we tried to convince our friends and allies that life is not so bright as it looks like or as it is presented. We did that all the time. It was misreceived, this message, for a long time as well. I can provide a lot of examples. For instance, when we were having presidency in the European Union in the second part of 2013, in the beginning of that, I remember our discussions on Eastern Partnership, on Ukraine. Almost nobody took a floor. There was no interest whatsoever, always signaled that something is happening. In 2014, it was an accession of Crimea. Even after that, sanctions were so weak. I remember first list of persons to be sanctioned. It was nothing to do with those who were taking decisions, because it was just let's be careful, let's be, so to say, cautious, let's not provoke something. This provocation becomes so toxic word, by the way, escalation, provocation. It's again the question, if you would agree, somebody thinks that if you are doing something, you are provoking. But the matter of fact is that you're provoking if you're not doing right things when you have to do. And if you're silent when you have to be vocal, or not doing things what you have to do, you're provoking. That was still not understood by many. But if you would ask why we reacted like that, again, 2008 summit in Bucharest. It was fight about membership action plan to Georgia and Ukraine. Those who are not in this business, so sorry for that. I will not overload you with the, so to say, not needed information. But that was exactly the case. We said, guys, we are talking about membership action plan, which is bureaucratic mechanism. It's not membership by far. It's just some signal that we are outreaching to our partners and helping them in reforms and in order to reach this goal sometime later. No, it was provocative, and there was big resistance, I remember, and we said it's wrong signal to Russia because they will immediately react. They will feel that this is their backyard and they are allowed to do whatever they want. No, you're wrong. And in few months, this war started in South Caucasus, and the Russians took 20% of Georgia. And was no whatsoever reaction to that, by the way, no sanctions, no additional pressure. It was not enough. So how many wake-up calls needed to wake up, the question? And that's, again, so I can talk endlessly about that. So this is not about optimism or pessimism. It's about realism, which is still happening. And I believe what changed now, I believe Swedes can share their feelings. I'm also always asking why you decided to join NATO after 22. Why it was not after 2014? Why it was not enough? It was not a signal. Something not clear for me, by the way, but it was exactly about the perception that something happening with you personally, like human beings. If somebody is humiliated or abused, it's happening with him. So empathy, it's fine. You are sorry, but it's not with you. So maybe it will go by somehow. And that understanding was prevailing in many countries of Europe. Now it's different. It's understood that it's too far. It's too deep. It's happening with us personally. And at the same time, a bit too late. No, not totally too late. It's also possible to repair things, but it costs more money, resources, everything. So you're asking what will happen? There, I'm sorry to say, but probably there are some business people. I'm not accusing and not naming names, but some, let's wait. And after everything will end, we'll have business with Putin again. So that's so wrong to think that nothing will change and this guy will be replaced by somebody else, the same as him. I disagree, because it could be bigger disaster to stay him in power for longer. He must be replaced. We will not do that. Russians will do themselves. Let's hope. But this is the point of attitude. And until somebody between us still believe that we can really somehow sort out the situation and come back to this normal, this is wrong. So how it's important to be patient, to have arguments, and to explain to our people that we have to continue to beat consistently. As Judith said, time factor is decisive. I would say not just time, but also to make right decisions, not only to allocate enough resources for defense, but to spend this money properly, to fill gaps of capabilities, and to do that on time, less bureaucracy. A lot of tasks, all are clear, everybody agrees, but it's moving sometimes so slowly. So we have to take responsibility and to make things making different. So this is about our optimism.
Thank you very much. And from a current ambassador to a veteran ambassador, then Judith, especially as a diplomat, existing security alliances and partnerships have experienced both growth. Finland and Sweden joined NATO, for example, but also quite a lot of strain in the last few years, especially this year. How can we keep these organizations alive, or perhaps even strengthen them going forward in these dire times?
Thank you. I mean, first of all, I just want to pick up on what Linus was saying. When Linus was foreign minister of Lithuania back in 2013, 2014, you were raising the flag a lot to say that the Russian threat was coming at Ukraine and at us. And there weren't many countries taking this seriously. Similar thing happened again in 2022, where actually the UK and the US, as long with Lithuania and others, were taking it seriously. But again, not everybody was taking it seriously. And the response every single time was, well, they wouldn't, would they? It's not in their interest. Well, no, I would agree. It's never in Russia's interest to attack its neighbours, but it doesn't mean that's going to happen. So I think my top tip, as always, listen to the Lithuanians. They know what they talk about. Listen to the Ukrainians as well. They know what they talk about. Do not assume that we have that understanding. And I think at points that has led to tension within certain multilateral organizations. I was at the Vilnius summit. It was quite a tense affair. It should have been the culmination of the Lithuanian EU presidency with Yanukovych signing the association agreement. That did not happen. So I think this has put pressure on international organizations, but I take a more positive view than your question suggests. Because if I look at what has happened, particularly since 2022 in the invasion of Ukraine, you have seen the international community pull together much more than anybody thought possible. And I speak as a Brit that was slightly outside the European room up until that point post-Brexit. It pulled us more closely together. The Joint Expeditionary Force, the 10-nation rapid reaction force led by the UK, which includes the Nordic and the Baltic states, is working very well and does work very well. I think what your question is alluding to is tension within NATO. NATO has withstood tensions before. If you look at the second Iraq campaign, that was pretty tough going as there were clear differences amongst the allies. But it is the world's most successful alliance. It has just expanded to 32 with two very capable countries, Sweden and Finland, coming in, who are exceptionally welcome. I think the way to carry it through is to ensure that NATO does rather than just declares. So rather than just political statements and declarations, it's about ensuring that every nation meets the 3.5% commitment and spends on defence. It's about burden sharing. And it's also about that common understanding of the threat, which, as I've said, if I come back, has not always been the case. And we need to broaden our focus and think more broadly about defence procurement, AI, cybersecurity, supply chains. I think that we have huge strength. We have differences, the elephant in the room, of course, being the United States. But there are commitments that remain. NATO is still sound. We have other formats as well. And actually strength in operating bilaterally and ensuring our bilateral relationships continue to work in support of Ukraine, but also our own security.
you very much. I'll try to be more optimistic on that point. And then we jump to Karin. Basically leading on from your former question, Ukrainian industry has been crucial for its war effort, but how can we integrate Ukraine's industrial and military capabilities into the great EU? Of course, famously, European farmers don't like having more competition. But what issues do you see, and what would be your solutions?
Yes. First of all, let us remember what this war is about. Ukraine's wish to be part of the European democratic family, which Putin can't accept. That's one reason for this war, and that's why we have to do as much as possible and more than that to support Ukraine's integration in the European Union. And this is not only about economy, it's about values, basically. But Ambassador, how many wake-up calls do we need? I often ask that question in Brussels. How many wake-up calls do we need? Ukraine is fighting for us. Ukraine's industry is really fighting to keep the factories up and running, and they do. I together with my team, I visited some steel plants in southeast Ukraine some weeks ago, and it's so impressive to see how they are operating under constantly attack, but still they are the backbone not only for the defense industry but also for the economy. But at that very moment, the EU put tariffs on Ukraine. How could that be possible? And that is something we have to fight against every day. The wake-up call should ring, should be loud and screaming also in Brussels, that we must keep the free trade open, because since the full-scale invasion, free trade has actually served as an economic lifeline for Ukraine. But now, since some year or some 1.5 years, we have seen a shift to more trade barriers towards Ukraine, because, as you mentioned, EU industries, EU farmers are worried about Ukraine. They should be worried about Russia. So we still have a lot of things to do, and back to our mindset. And let's go back to Russia. We have had, is it 20, I lost to count, there's so many, but 21 sanction packages by now. But still, we are buying Russian steel. You can compare the Swedish full production for 1 year. So much steel slabs goes from Russia to the European Union every year, still 4 years after the full-scale invasion. It has to come to an end. And I visited some weeks ago the Russian aluminium plant in Ireland. How is it possible that they supply the Russian defense industry with aluminium 4 years after the full-scale invasion? The EU has done fantastic things. So many steps have been taken, and we have mobilized a lot to support Ukraine, but not enough.
Thank you. And then we go back to Oscar. Wait. Yes, Oscar, what would you say are the crucial lessons from this war that we are overlooking here in Europe?
Well, that is a very good question, because there's this wide discrepancy, as all of you know, between lessons observed and lessons learned. Because just because you see something and write about it doesn't mean you take it in. So one thing I've been thinking about, is what's interesting about a drone? Can anyone tell me? Like, why? It's cheap and you can mass produce at scale. I think it's one more thing too. You're right. They're only interesting now that they're cheap. Like you know, drones have been in there for at least 4 or 5 decades in the world wars, if you want to go there. But now they're cheap, but what is also cheap is the electronics you put into it. Camera, communication link. So the drone in itself is not that interesting. It's what ties it all together. It's software, right? It's a kind of it's the data. And, you know, just take an example from the Secretary of the Army in the US. He said, wow, the Ukrainians managed to fuse everything, you know, command, control, sensors, all the systems into one. We can't do that. And it's fascinating because I don't think there's really any NATO states that can do that on the same way, which is not necessarily an interesting engineering problem. It's just, you know, it is the way it is for many reasons. Information security legislation is one of the reasons. So an overlooked lesson is not just about the drones, what ties them all together, and how do you, you know, get the data, the situation awareness, the command and control. How do you make it all work in a nice way? Ukraine did it. And the reasons are many and the drivers are many, and that leads me to a second part, which is organizational change. Yes, maybe, you know, the UK has 8,000 drones, but it's not enough if you take drones and sprinkle them into the existing force with existing doctrine, then you get very marginal results. An overlooked lesson is what type of organizational change do you put through your armed forces to actually make use of all the opportunities that you know, unmanned platforms in all domains can do. And then, you know, third and lastly, like strike means. It's long been taboo in Western armed forces to build any type of long-range strikes. We had the INF treaty that kind of banned ground-launched missiles, but even air-launched, you know, ground attack missiles is probably what we're lacking the most, and it's also what Ukraine has been asking the most for, you know, air defense and long-range strike capabilities. You know, that's what you need. But for mostly cultural reasons, we don't really have that many strike means in Western armed forces. And if you're sitting in Moscow and you're trying to, you know, assess the correlation of forces, if you want to go to fight with Europe, you're going to ask yourself, what do they have that can hurt us? And an air defense missile will not hurt you, or a, you know, a air-to-air missile that shoots down a fighter jet won't hurt you for real. But long-range strike can do that, and that's what Ukraine has been putting so much effort to building the last years, and now starting to hurt Russia, both, you know, behind the absolute front in the mid-strike, but also long-range strike throughout Russia. So that's the first few overlooked lessons I'm thinking of, but we'll have the rest for after.
Yeah. Hello. Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, thank you very much. And now, because you have been extraordinarily great with keeping timetables, most questions from the audience. Yes. Yeah, we have one here.
You said that, if I understood, that you don't think Russia would, as one reason not remove Putin, that Russia would not remove Putin. And you claim that Ukraine will eventually win the war. But if you put those two together, first of all, how secure is Putin? And what about the issue of nuclear weapons if he feels he could be removed or lose power or lose the war?
Thank you. I didn't say that Russia will not remove. I said that it's difficult to say.
Yeah.
That's the point, and I hope they will, because otherwise, if Putin will stay in power, he will continue war. He doesn't need any peace. Peace is not in his plans. Even bad war for him is better than bad peace. So that's why. And unless his elite, so-called elite, will not understand that this is harmful for them, basically, he's ruining his own country. He's killing every day more than 1,000 his own soldiers, not just Ukrainians. He's lagging behind in industry, technology, whatever. So there's big damage to his own country, and the elite knows that. I don't think that all elite would like to share with him this fatal moment to pass away, you know, or to commit suicide in nuclear catastrophe. That's answering to your second question, and it is bluffing in this regard because it's too far. Everybody understands that this is mutually destroying, so to say. It's not quite the optional In other words, saying we should rely that they will probably remove himself, but we cannot do that for them, you know. So that means we have to do ourselves what we have to do. A lot of tasks not yet fulfilled, but we promised to do. In defense spendings, in overall defense spendings, you know that's not all countries doing that, and not because of Trump, by the way, because of ourselves. And I can tell even during Obama there were commitments to spend 2% at that time GDP. I shouldn't say that nobody did that, but less than 10 countries, even then. So it's not also not about overall defense spendings, but it's about output efficiency, what you are doing with this money. If you are directing this money into fill gaps of capabilities of collective game, that's okay, but it's not always the case. Now we have this solution of 5%, you know, 3.5% for defense and 1.5% related to defense. And here jazz starts, you know, everybody would like to spend for bridges, for roads. Okay, but I mean, this is also should be some order. So we have to do ourselves, and also speed. Also this the 21st package of sanctions, it's a shame. More than 4 years of war, and we still have 21 package, which the first package was supposed to ruin the economy. You remember the statements? If Russians will dare to attack Ukraine, so we will, so to say, introduce sanctions, will ruin economy. By far, nothing happening. So let's make consistent these sanctions to avoid caveats, circumventions, and be consistent with regard to the third countries which helping Russia to avoid sanctions. Yes. I can tell more, but I have no time, so I will stop.
I mean, just a couple of things to follow up on that. I think the first point, Putin is playing a long-term game. His calculation is that he can outweight the West, that democratic cycles mean that support will wane for Ukraine, and also, by the way, Russia's hybrid attacks against us, disinformation, targeting our societies, fueling splits and dissent, and all of that makes him believe he can win this by fighting enough to keep the war going, keep Ukraine suffering, until the point where we decide we've had enough and will no longer support. And of course, the counter to that is we cannot step away because Ukraine continues to suffer and the threat continues against us as well. So I think it's really important to understand that Putin, his political goal is the subjugation of Ukraine. He believes that Russia is not whole or complete without Ukraine. At the same token, you know, for Ukrainians, you can't just stop fighting because that's then the end of it, isn't it? That's the end of your country. And I think it's a real mistake for negotiators to think it's about territory and that you can cut a piece off Ukraine, give it to Russia, and that will end the war. No, it won't. It will merely advance the front line from which the next attack can be launched. So what it really means is ensuring that Ukraine has the wherewithal to withstand the Russian threat and hit back. Long-range strikes into Russia hurt Putin. I mean, it's very striking now, no pun intended, to see what is happening and how difficult that is for him domestically. So I think we have to be really clear. We're in this for the long haul. We don't want an escalation. We want the war to end. That is up to the Russian side to end it, but to surrender that long-term political goal, which is the total subjugation of Ukraine.
From the Russian perspective, the war is a catastrophe. They did not win. They thought they could take Ukraine in some weeks. It was not possible, and it will not be possible. But even Putin has a budget, and 21 packages, sanction packages, is not enough. I think we should turn it upside down and say that it should be forbidden to trade with Russia, with perhaps some exceptions, perhaps. But to put economic pressure on Putin, because it's expensive to buy and produce all these materials in order to kill Ukrainians. He has a budget. Just limit his budget to a zero. That's one thing. And back to our mindset. Every time we say that we believe in Ukraine, we stand with Ukraine, we see that Ukraine is fighting successfully, not only for Ukraine, but also for us. It also mobilizes for example, the Americans to be on the winning side of this. So it's extremely important that we stick to the truth about the war in Ukraine and not fall into the trap to describe it from a Kremlin angle.
Okay, and with that, we have 15 seconds left, but I don't think that's enough for any other questions. So thank you so much for all of you on panel for being here. A round of applause for them. And thank you all in the audience as well, and for those of you who are watching the stream. And yeah, thank you all for coming. Hope to see you at other events. Take care.